Continuation to the last lesson, this presentation will concern devices within strategies. Let's get started. We're going to use the text from the 2015 FRQ Cesar Chavez, and it goes like this. Examine history. Examine history. Who gets killed in the case of a violent revolution? The poor, the workers. The people of the land are the ones who give their bodies and don't really gain that much for it. We believe it is too big a price to pay for not getting anything. Those who espouse violence exploit people. To call men to arms with many promises, to ask them to give up their lives for a cause, and then not produce for them afterwards is the most vicious type of oppression. We know that most likely we are not going to do anything else the rest of our lives except build our union. For us, there is nowhere else to go. Although we would like to see victory come soon, we are willing to wait. In this sense, time is our ally. We learned many years ago that the rich may have money, but the poor have time. Now, the entirety of this video will concern this particular text. Let's get started. He begins with a rhetorical question, one that goes, who gets killed in the case of a violent revolution, the poor or the workers? This is not technically a rhetorical question. This is a call and response. Who? He answers. But in the context of the text, since this is already halfway through the text, and he's already been talking about violence and how violent revolution leads to the destruction of the cause and the death of the people within it, right? When he says who gets killed in the case of a violent revolution, he is implying the answer, right? And this is how it becomes a rhetorical question. Now this works because it sets up a historical allusion. Let's examine that historical allusion. Here's how you could say it, right? And we're going to talk about throughout this whole video on the what, the how, and the why. This is the what and the how. By Chavez urging his audience to, quote, examine history and to consider that those who get killed in the case of a violent revolution are the poor and the workers, he looks to the past as an indication of the future. What's the what, right? He is looking to the past as an indication of the future. What is the how? By urging his audience to examine history, right? Now let's look at that examination of history and the allusion. First, writing something like this, a sentence like this, it does tell me what Chavez is doing, looking to the past as an indication of the future. And it does tell me how he's doing it, right? He's doing that by examining history. But it's not telling me why it matters. And this is important when analyzing a text. Yes, you want to talk about the strategy and the devices within it. You want to tell me what's happening, how it's happening, but why it matters. This is very important. Here's that example. Here's how you connect the strategy to the purpose. Chavez presents this historical maxim to assure an indignant and enraged audience that the best way, the only way to achieve significant and lasting change is through nonviolent actions. So he is using historical allusions, or rather saying look at history, using the rhetorical question to set up the historical allusion, right, in order to establish the point that if it happened in the past, it will happen in the future. And what is that thing that will happen in the future? Well, what will happen is that the only way to achieve this significant and lasting change is through nonviolent actions, because the past tells us that every time that a violent action has been committed, it hasn't led to successful revolutions, right? Okay, here's that allusion to history that I've been talking about. He begins with examine history, breaks into the rhetorical question, and then continues. The people of the land are the ones who give their bodies and don't really gain that much for it, right? It's a very unspecific historical allusion. He doesn't mention a revolution in France, but it is specifically targeted at violent revolutions. So while it is unspecific, it is specific in its theme, violent revolutions. And what does it do? It sets up a cause and effect strategy using the template of the past. Workers without a union to support them anticipates a future where they give up their lives for a cause and then have nothing to show for it. And he's already establishing his idea, which is we need a union. Let's look at the purpose here. You establish the need to organize a union. How do you do that? Well, violent uprisings end in the deaths of the poor workers who did not have a union to represent them. So then what's the purpose? We need a union. If we have a union, this wouldn't happen to us. Oh, but why don't we just a revolt, right? An uprising, a violent uprising. No, history tells us that doesn't work. That's the point he's trying to make. Now let's look at his diction, right? Again, we're evaluating how the devices are working within the strategies. Here's an example of really harsh diction that drives his point forward. Those who espouse violence exploit the people, right? Afterwards, it is the most vicious type of oppression, right? Now, let's break it down. Using this jarring language helps Chavez denounce anyone who espouses violence as perpetuating a futile system of exploitation and oppression. How? Well, words like violence and vicious, they strengthen the author's reasoning as to why unions are needed. Unlike violent uprisings, which gamble the cause as well as a person's life, unions are a steady, sure road to protection. Words like oppression indicate that the current state is not only an injustice to workers, but it is an infringement of their rights. Let's put that together. What he's saying is that when you espouse violence, all you are accomplishing, and you're telling other people to espouse violence as well, all you're doing is perpetuating a futile system of exploitation. Well, how's that so? Well, I already told you, the illusion. History tells us that. That's how that's so, right? That's why it follows logically. And then, using words like vicious are strengthening the reasoning. Well, how is that the case? Well, because here you ask them to give up their lives for a cause, and then they have nothing to show for afterwards. This is oppressive. This is not a liberating system, that is the violent revolutions. It is an oppressive system that is futile and repetitive, right? So, by also saying oppression, we're saying that the current state is not only an injustice to workers, but is infringing on their rights. Okay, let's look at the first person references that the author makes here. We believe it is too big a price. We know that most likely we are not going to do anything else for us. There is nowhere else to go, for we would like to see victories. We are willing to wait. We learned many years ago, right? These are all moments. Now, me pointing out the we in it is not enough. I have to tell the reader what it's doing and how it's doing it and why it's doing it. So here's what's doing. It's building ethos. It is building ethos. Well, Chavez repeatedly using phrases in his conclusions like we know and for us and we learned. These words like we and us help Chavez include himself in the group he is addressing, the poor. This strengthens his ethos. Why? Because his opinion on the matter now is more relatable, more personal, because he is part of the workers that require a union. He is one of us, right? And he is addressing, will be the audience, us. This is why he's building an ethos. And in many ways, it's making a personal connection. Relatability. Look at the very last thing he does, the repetition of time. Time is used as a method of comparing the wealthy to the poor. Twice, time is repeated. Both times it is paired in reference to the poor as both an ally and a tool, meaning the poor have time, right? Which contrasts the rich, who only have money. They do not have time. Now, why is this more important? Well, money's not the only currency. See, he says, we learned many years ago that the rich, this is how he ends the passage, may have money, but the poor have time. Well, just like he tied nonviolence to power earlier on in the speech at the beginning, he's now using the same format, connoting that the money of the rich and the time of the poor are both indications of power. So they have power because they have money? Well, we have power too, because we have time. And that is the real power, right? So if we go back to the beginning and look at the very first, here it is, the whole thing. Now we see how it works together. Examine history, who gets killed, the poor, that's who that gets killed. It isn't worth it. And those who would say it is worth it, violence, they are simply exploiting you. It is a waste of time. You need to believe us. We have your best interest in mind. We need a union. Why? Because a union is a kind of power. Why? Because unlike the rich who have money, the union gives us time and is a steady road to progress. There it is. That is how the entire passage works together, right? Okay. Now, for my students concluding the assignment, it's spring break, no assignment. You're welcome.